Greetings and salutations, young Drew believers. So this week we're going to finish up with free will, the free will debate, and we will begin talking about ethics. And so one of the most important readings in the chapter for you this week comes from William James, the great American pragmatist philosopher. And James has in my estimation, the best argument for the existence, for the reality of free will that I have ever heard. James, his approach in the dilemma of determinism is twofold. The first thing he wants to do is to establish a doctrine known as indeterminism, which is the view that not all things are caused by preceding events and the laws of nature. Some things happen at random, by chance, if you will, right? And this is borne out today in modern science. So James is writing in 1900, right? So, um, he's writing at a time when Einstein is beginning to uh, really revolutionize physics, and quantum mechanics is right on the cusp, right? We're almost, at that time, relativity theory is just coming in with Einstein, obviously, and then quantum mechanics is following in the wake. And quantum mechanics outlines that not all events seem to have causes. There are many mysterious phenomenon in on the quantum level. And really quickly, let me qualify or clarify what I mean by quantum. Quantum mechanics refers to the level of physics at which we study the atomic and the subatomic, uh, the physics of the very small. And when you get to that level, things become strange, right? The rules, the regulations, uh, the orderly expectations that you get on a macro level, the level of what philosophers call medium-sized objects, humans, tables, dogs, cars, right, break down. So it seems like there is, in fact, an element of chance in the world, right? And James uses a thought experiment to illustrate this. He asks you to imagine that when he leaves Harvard, that's where he taught, he was giving a lecture. When he leaves Harvard, he can go down one of two streets. He can walk down Divinity Avenue or Oxford Street. And either way will take him home, right? It's about a block either way. So he asks you to first imagine he walks down Divinity Avenue, and then to suppose that the powers that be that govern the universe, whatever they are, right, they take him back to Harvard. They erase the past 10 minutes of history, and this time he walks down Oxford Avenue, right? And the question is, who among you, even the most hardcore determinists, could tell if you were sitting outside space and time and observing the two timelines, who could tell which one was necessary and which one was random? And James' point is nobody could, right? But this is where a lot of historians of philosophy stop, and they think that's the be-all, end-all of James' argument against determinism. He's just getting warmed up. The second part of the argument is the far more important part. And James, he begins that by recounting a story that was in the news a few days before he gave his lecture. A man murdered his wife and showed no remorse, etc. And James asked the determinists in the crowd, what must you conclude from this? The only thing you can conclude is that this was necessary if you're a determinist from the beginning of the universe. Nothing else could have happened at that time. It happened because it had to happen, and nothing could have been otherwise. But interestingly, when you reflect on that, you start to feel regret. Not just regret for that murder, but regret for all the cruel things that any of us have done, major or minor. You feel regret for the cruelty of humanity. And then James asks, what good is that feeling, that pang of moral regret, if it's not possible for we as individuals and we collectively as human beings to do better? In other words, why would we have moral regret if there was no way to improve upon the past? Right? It seems very, very unlikely that we would have ever developed a capacity like moral regret if we didn't have the ability to do otherwise. So moral regret seems to be intimately bound up with our capacity for free will. And this is, and again, in my opinion, it's a masterstroke. It's just a brilliant argument. There's also, immediately after the James piece in the Vaughan textbook, there's a short excerpt from a contemporary philosopher, a man named Robert Kane, Philosophy and Free Will in Modern Science is what it's called. It's an excerpt from a longer book he wrote in '05. And there Kane wants to know, he tries to establish how doctrines of free will square with modern science. Now, this is, again, a huge assumption that often goes unquestioned these days. The assumption being that any purported claim to truth must be squared with the findings of science, right? Because this is the level at which we hold science, right? Science is, culturally speaking for us, the final arbiter of truth, right? So if someone purports to be advancing a doctrine that they claim to be true, we have to square it with science, right? Okay, well, what does science say about human capacity for free will? Well, unsurprisingly, Kane relates it to quantum mechanics, right? And he asks, again, whether or not a change on a micro level, a level as small as the subatomic, could affect a macro system like a human being. And he thinks he argues that the changes would be so small as to be insignificant. But then he combines quantum mechanics with another theory some of you might be familiar with, chaos theory. And chaos theory is it's the doctrine that a change on a micro level can have a huge impact on a macro level. And when you think about it, this is not so very difficult to grasp, because that's essentially what a mutation is. It's a change in an allele that has a significant impact on an organism. So Kane asks, if we take quantum mechanics and combine it with chaos theory, does that give us sufficient leeway to have free will? And he remains undecided on that, right? But again, just know that scientists are beginning to finally take this debate seriously, and I strongly encourage you, again, listen to the Philosophy Bites interview with Dina Roskies, because she's at Dartmouth, one of the Ivy Leagues, and she has studied the psychological research into free will, and she finds it less than impressive, right? Again, essentially, what the empirical psychologist, the neuroscience is fleshed out, is that your brain is involved in decision making, which is not an earth-shattering conclusion, right? So be sure to weigh in on the discussion boards, and we will dive into the ramifications of this entire debate, i.e. ethics, in a couple days.